The discovery. The twin sons of Zephyr cast their amber glow across the endless expanse of cracked red earth, while magnetic storms whispered through the clouds like distant predators. For Marcus Kane, tucked away in the skeletal remains of an old terraforming outpost, the silence had become his closest companion. He spent his days repairing what could be fixed and salvaging what couldn't, rarely expecting anything new to disturb his solitary routine. The outpost had been abandoned for over a decade, leaving behind only rusted machinery and the ghost of humanity's failed attempt to tame this hostile world. On this particular evening, Marcus was outside welding the undercarriage of a damaged scout rover when something caught his eye, a flicker of movement near the ridge's edge. A flash of brilliant white against the rust-colored landscape, too solid to be a mirage, too silent to be machinery. He paused, raising his visor and squinting against the glare. The shape moved again, slower this time, dragging itself from shadow to sunlight with obvious pain and effort. Curiosity pulled him away from his work, the plasma torch cooling in his hand as he approached. What he found made his breath catch in his throat. It was a leopard, or something remarkably close to one. Clearly alien in origin, her build was sleeker than any big cat from Earth, and her fur shimmered with an ethereal quality beneath its coat of pure, brilliant white. But she was badly injured. Her left hind leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, dragging uselessly through the dirt. Each breath came shallow and labored, pain evident in the hollow depths behind her striking eyes. Marcus stopped several feet away. She watched him with the wariness of a wild creature caught between fight and flight, but too broken to manage either. He could see it in her posture, she wouldn't survive another night alone in this wasteland. The mechanic crouched down slowly, keeping his hands visible and empty. "Easy there," he murmured softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." She responded with a low growl, not quite a threat, more a sound of warning. Her tail twitched, and Marcus could see the full extent of her injuries. The leg was clearly fractured, possibly crushed, and there were other wounds scattered across her body, scratches, bruises, and what looked like signs of internal trauma. He had treated injured scavenger dogs before, even helped wounded colonists, but nothing quite like this magnificent creature. Still, she didn't move when he slowly reached out, just watched him with those weary, burning eyes that seemed to hold depths of intelligence he hadn't expected. "All right," he said under his breath, making his decision. "You're coming with me." The healing. Marcus gathered the injured leopard into his arms with extreme care, supporting her broken leg with a rolled-up field pack. She was heavier than he'd expected, dense with muscle even in her wounded state, but she didn't struggle as he carried her across the dusty ground toward his workshop. Her head lolled against his chest, warm breath flowing through bloodied whiskers. The twin suns were beginning to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the rusted walls of his makeshift home. Inside, he laid her gently onto a cot usually reserved for malfunctioning drones. She didn't growl again, just looked at him with an expression that seemed almost grateful. In that single glance, Marcus felt something stir deep within him, an instinct that told him he hadn't just found a wounded animal. This was something special, something that had chosen not to give up, not yet. The workshop transformed into a medical bay overnight. Marcus worked in focused silence, his hands steady as he cleaned her wounds with tools designed for machinery, not flesh. The antiseptic foam hissed against her injuries, but she barely flinched. The fracture was complex, a clean break complicated by spiral fragmentation across the joint. A leg like that wouldn't heal naturally on Zephyr, not without significant help. He didn't know her exact species, but her anatomy resembled feline physiology closely enough for him to work with. Over the next several hours, Marcus bent over his forge, shaping a lightweight exoframe from spare drone plating. He reinforced it with shock-absorbent pads and fitted it with adjustable tension cables. It wasn't pretty, but it was strong and flexible, designed not for war, but for survival. The entire time, the leopard, Astra, he'd begun calling her in his mind, never looked away. Even when sedated, her eyes would drift open periodically, pupils narrowing in the low light as if evaluating whether he could be trusted. "You're going to walk again," he told her as he fitted the brace to her leg with the gentle precision of a master craftsman. You didn't crawl all this way just to die in my scrap heap. By the second night, her breathing had steadied. The wounds were cleaned and closed, the fever had passed. She still couldn't move much, muscle fatigue and lingering pain kept her still, but she was no longer balanced on the edge of death. Marcus made her a bed of thermal blankets in the corner, close to the generator's reassuring hum. He adjusted the lights to a comfortable dim and kept the workshop sealed. She ate small portions of protein paste and purified water, her sharp teeth flashing once when he approached too quickly, then retreating into cautious acceptance. There was no trust yet, but there was understanding. She allowed his presence, accepted his care. Sometimes, when he thought she was sleeping, she would open one eye and watch him with the kind of awareness that sent chills down his spine, not simple animal alertness, but something far more complex. She was studying him, just as he was learning about her. Two damaged souls in the middle of nowhere, bound not by words but by the quiet mechanics of survival and in growing sense that their meeting was more than mere chance. The bond. The third day after Astra's arrival dawned with frost clinging to the compound's edges. On Zephyra, the twin suns could roast metal by noon, but at sunrise, the chill made even machines seem to shiver. Marcus rose early as always, already at the forge fine-tuning the tension coils on Astra's brace when he heard her breathing change, quicker, more purposeful. He turned to find her standing upright for the first time since he'd found her. She wasn't fully steady yet. Her injured leg, now encased in the mechanical brace, hovered inches above the ground, but her other three legs held her weight. Her head was low, tail coiled tightly, and her eyes were locked on his with an intensity that seemed to weigh the balance of the entire universe. "You're up," he said softly, setting down his tools. "Didn't expect that until tomorrow." Astra didn't respond, but she didn't fall either. Her muscles trembled from the effort, and Marcus could see the determination burning in her gaze. He didn't move closer, didn't want to startle her. Instead, he crouched down slowly, maintaining eye contact. "You want to try walking?" Her nostrils flared, ears flicking once in what might have been acknowledgement. Marcus rose and approached step by careful step until he was close enough to kneel beside her. She allowed him to lift her injured leg, her breath hitching as he guided it into the brace's support system. The mechanism snapped into place with a soft hiss of hydraulics. She jerked once, growled, then stood taller, testing the artificial limb's weight distribution. "Easy," Marcus murmured, steadying her flank. "Just one step." He guided her toward the small ramp he'd built the previous night, a sloped platform leading from her bed to the workshop center, lined with grip pads salvaged from an old hover hauler. She hesitated, the mechanical limb trembling under the brace's support. For a heartbeat, he thought she might retreat. But then she stepped forward. The sound was subtle, just the soft click of metal against floor, but it echoed through the workshop like thunder. Another step followed, then a third. Her gait was uneven, her movements rigid, but she didn't stop. Marcus stood in amazed silence, watching her circle the workshop once, then again. Every motion was a battle between pain and pride, determination winning each small victory. When she completed her third lap, she collapsed onto her side near the forge, tongue lolling as she panted, eyes closed, tail twitching against the floor. He sat beside her carefully. "I didn't build it for looks," he said, gently patting the brace, but it held. She didn't move immediately, but after a while, her head shifted just enough to rest against his boot. It wasn't submission, it was trust, the first real sign that she'd accepted him not just as her savior, but as something approaching a friend. Over the following weeks, that trust deepened into an extraordinary bond. Astra grew stronger daily, her natural healing accelerated by the mechanical support and Marcus's careful attention. She began following him around the compound, watching as he worked on various repairs, her intelligent eyes absorbing everything. Marcus found himself talking to her constantly, explaining his projects, sharing thoughts he'd kept buried during years of solitude. She seemed to understand more than should have been possible, sometimes positioning herself to help, holding tools steady with her paws or alerting him to problems he might have missed. They developed their own communication system, specific sounds, gestures, even shared silences that spoke volumes. Marcus realized he'd never felt less alone, and judging by Astra's growing confidence and contentment, neither had she. But even as their friendship flourished, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Astra was meant for something greater than life in an abandoned outpost. Sometimes he caught her staring toward the horizon with an expression he couldn't quite interpret, not longing exactly, but a kind of patient waiting, as if she knew something he didn't. Something was coming. He just didn't know what. The separation. 6 months had passed since Marcus first found Astra bleeding in the wasteland. The mechanical brace had become as natural to her as her own limbs, and her strength had not only returned but seemed to exceed what it had been before her injury. She moved with fluid grace, her white coat now gleaming with health under Zephyr's twin suns. But Marcus had begun to notice subtle changes in her behavior. She would spend hours each day at the ridge's edge, gazing toward the distant mountains with an intensity that made his chest tighten with unspoken worry. Her sleep had become restless, filled with soft calls and movements that suggested dreams of running, not away from something, but toward it. One morning, Marcus woke to find Astra sitting by the workshop's main door, fully alert despite the early hour. Her posture was different, regal, purposeful, as if she'd come to some important decision during the night. "What is it, girl?" he asked, but she simply looked at him with those profound eyes and padded outside. At the ridge, she turned back to him and made a sound he'd never heard before, part roar, part song, carrying across the empty landscape with haunting beauty. The call echoed off the distant cliffs, and Marcus felt his breath catch as something answered. Far in the distance, barely visible against the rust-colored horizon, shapes began to emerge. At first, Marcus thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But as minutes passed, the shapes resolved into unmistakable forms, more leopards, dozens of them, moving with synchronized purpose across the wasteland. They were Astra's kind, and they were coming for her. Astra turned to Marcus, her expression gentle but resolute. She approached him slowly and rested her massive head against his chest, a gesture of gratitude and farewell that nearly broke his heart. "You have to go, don't you?" he whispered, stroking her fur one last time. "You're their leader." The approaching leopards reached the base of the ridge and began climbing with impossible grace. As they drew closer, Marcus could see the deference in their movements, the way they positioned themselves around Astra. She wasn't just one of them, she was their matriarch, their queen, and her people had finally found her. The largest of the approaching leopards, a magnificent male with silver markings, approached cautiously. His eyes met Marcus's with what seemed like recognition and respect. He made a low sound to Astra, and she responded with gentle authority. For several minutes, the reunion continued in their complex language of sounds and gestures. Marcus stood aside, feeling like an intruder in this moment of reunion, yet honored to witness it. Finally, Astra turned back to him one final time. She moved to where he kept his tools and carefully picked up the small plasma torch he'd been using when he first spotted her. With deliberate precision, she placed it at his feet, a gift, a memory, a promise that this parting meant something. Then, without another sound, she turned and began walking toward the horizon with her people. Marcus watched until the white flash of her coat disappeared into the heat shimmer, leaving him alone with his memories and the strange certainty that their story wasn't truly finished. For 3 years, Marcus continued his solitary existence at the outpost, but something fundamental had changed. The silence no longer felt like companionship, it felt like waiting. He found himself often standing at the ridge where he'd first seen Astra, wondering if she was happy, if she remembered their time together, if she would ever return. He kept the plasma torch she'd given him polished and ready, though he couldn't say exactly what he was keeping it ready for. The answer came on a day when Zephyr's twin suns hung low in the sky, painting the wasteland in shades of gold and crimson. Marcus was working on a particularly stubborn generator when he heard it, a sound that made his heart skip and his hands freeze on his tools. It was Astra's call, the same haunting song she'd sung the day she left. But this time, it wasn't alone. Dozens of voices joined in harmony, creating a symphony that echoed across the empty landscape and filled the air with wild, beautiful music. Marcus dropped his tools and ran to the ridge, his heart pounding with hope and disbelief. What he saw there would change everything. The return. The sight that greeted Marcus at the ridge defied every expectation and stole the breath from his lungs. Astra stood at the front of what could only be described as an army. Hundreds of leopards stretched across the landscape as far as the eye could see, not just the few dozen who had taken her away, but an entire civilization of her kind. They moved in perfect formation, their coats ranging from pure white like Astra's to deep silver and pale gold, creating a living tapestry against the red earth. But Astra herself was transformed. Gone was the broken creature he'd nursed back to health. She stood taller, stronger, radiating an authority that seemed to bend the very air around her. Yet when their eyes met across the distance, her expression softened with unmistakable recognition and joy. She bounded toward him with fluid grace, the mechanical brace he'd crafted still perfectly integrated with her natural movement. When she reached him, she did something extraordinary. She bowed her great head in a gesture of profound respect, a queen acknowledging the debt she owed to a humble mechanic. Astra, Marcus breathed, reaching out to touch her familiar white fur. What is all this? As if in answer to his question, the massive army of leopards began to part. Through the corridor they created walked a figure that made Marcus's eyes widen in amazement, another human, dressed in the elaborate robes of what appeared to be a tribal leader, but moving with the same fluid grace as the leopards around him. The man approached with slow, respectful steps. His eyes held wisdom and gratitude in equal measure. "You are Marcus Kane," the man said, his voice carrying the slight accent of the outer colonies. "The one who saved our queen." "Your queen?" Marcus looked between the man and Astra, pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to form in his mind. "I am Elder Tomas of the Zephyrin colonies," the man explained. 3 years ago, our settlements were dying. The magnetic storms were increasing, the water sources failing, and our technology was no match for this world's hostility. We were preparing to evacuate when our scouts discovered something remarkable, a species of leopards that had not only adapted to Zephyra but seemed to thrive here. He gestured toward Astra with reverence. "These creatures possess an intelligence beyond anything we imagined. They can predict the magnetic storms, locate hidden water sources, navigate the wasteland better than any GPS system. When we learned to communicate with them, they offered us something incredible: partnership." Marcus felt his understanding shift like tectonic plates. Partnership? They taught us how to truly live on Zephyra instead of merely surviving. In return, we helped them with technology, medicine, protection from the few dangers even they cannot handle alone. It's a symbiosis that has allowed both our peoples to flourish. Astra moved to Marcus's side, her warm flank pressing against his leg in the familiar gesture of companionship he remembered so well. But, Elder Tomas continued, there was a problem. Their queen, Astra, had been missing for over a year before you found her. She'd been leading a scouting party when they were caught in a magnetic storm that scattered them across hundreds of miles. Some were found quickly, others made their own way home, but Astra was presumed dead. The elder's eyes grew bright with emotion. Without her, our alliance was failing. The leopards were losing their organization, their cooperation with us was becoming strained. Some colonies were already preparing to leave Zephyra again. But 3 years ago, when she returned to them, healthy, strong, bearing the marks of human craftsmanship that had saved her life, everything changed. Marcus looked down at the brace still adorning Astra's leg, understanding flooding through him. "She told them about you," Elder Tomas said softly. "Not in words, but in their way. She told them of the human who asked for nothing in return, who gave her not just life but dignity, who treated her as an equal rather than a pet or a beast to be tamed. She convinced them that humanity could be trusted, that our partnership could be deeper than mere convenience." The elder stepped closer. "Marcus Kane, I bring a message from 7 thriving colonies and their leopard allies. We want to offer you something we've never offered anyone, true citizenship in our new world. Not as a guest or a settler, but as the friend of the Queen, the man whose kindness saved not just one life, but an entire civilization. Marcus felt overwhelmed, looking out at the hundreds of magnificent creatures waiting patiently in the distance, then down at Astra, who watched him with those same intelligent eyes that had trusted him from the beginning. "You want me to join you," he said, not really a question. "We want you to come home," Elder Tomas replied. Astra has spent 3 years telling everyone who would listen about the man who fixed more than her broken leg, who fixed her faith in the possibility of friendship between species. "You're already a legend among both our peoples." Astra made a soft sound, pressing closer to Marcus. In her eyes, he saw the same trust that had developed between them years ago, but now amplified by the love and respect of an entire people who had heard her story. Marcus looked around at his lonely outpost, then back at the incredible sight before him, hundreds of leopards and the promise of human communities where cooperation and mutual respect had created something genuinely new and beautiful. "Well," he said, running his hand along Astra's strong neck, "I suppose I've been waiting long enough." The celebration that followed echoed across the wasteland of Zephyr like nothing that world had ever heard, the joyous calls of leopards mixing with human laughter, the sound of two species who had found in each other not just alliance, but family. As Marcus gathered his few possessions and prepared to leave the outpost that had been his home for so many years, he paused to look back one final time. On his workbench sat the plasma torch Astra had given him, his first clue that their separation was not permanent, but preparation for something greater. He picked it up, tucked it carefully into his pack, and walked toward his new life with his friend, his family, and his new people. In the distance, the twin suns of Zephyr set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of hope and possibility. And for the first time in years, Marcus Kane was not walking toward that horizon alone. The end.